Networks are absolutely the lifeblood of any organisation, but they are also the lifeblood of an individual's career. And by networks, I don't mean those formal employee groups around organisations. I mean the informal networks, the who do you talk to? Who do you go to when you want to have a little bit of a gossip about what's happening? Who do you get information from? Those networks are critical to your success personally, but they are also important to the success of the organisation. Now, we all know these informal networks are important, but we're only really just starting to understand how important. 83% of people recently surveyed found that actually the reason they got their current job was through someone in their informal network. It has a big impact on who gets in to start with, but boy does it have an impact on how well you do in the organisation. It affects your salary, it affects appraisal ratings, it could affect your bonus, and of course all of that leads to who gets promoted ultimately. So the thing about networks is that they can be really inclusive, but boy can they be really exclusive as well, and that is because of something called homophily. Now, homophily is our preference to communicate with, socialise with, form relationships with, network with people that are like us. And it's one of the reasons that you get things like the old boys network, or what I prefer to think of as birds of a feather, because you get networks of young women, for example, in organisations too. Now, where it really becomes a diversity issue is the fact that in lots of organisations, the people at the top tend to be white men, and so people in those networks are very well placed for getting promoted up through the organisation. We also know that women and men's networks differ quite a bit. The size of men and women's networks is now pretty comparable. That's a big change since the 90s, but size isn't everything. There are other key differences that it's important to know about. Men typically have much more of what's called instrumental support in their network. Who do you tap for a favour when you need to get something done? Who can you pull resource from? Whereas women tend to have higher levels of social support. Who do you go to when you've had a bit of a bad day? Those two different types of network obviously provide different levels of support, and that support has career implications. The other thing that we know is that ethnic minorities within organisations are 3 times less likely to have access to some of that confidential information that you get through networks, and that has real implications for diversity. The critical thing is not to just ignore it and assume that networks are going to develop nicely by themselves. They will do, but in a way that isn't necessarily very helpful and certainly not very diverse. The other thing not to rely on is formal networks in organisations, because that can be a very dangerous tactic. What we need to do is to start mapping networks in organisations, and there are some great techniques out there to do that. If we take a senior person and we map their informal network around them, that gives us a great heads up on what the organisation is going to look like in 2, 3, 5 years' time, and an earlier heads up means we can do something about it now. So if you're interested in finding out more about this, drop me an email using the link below or give us a call.